We now move to agenda item number 5, review and consideration of a loan request from Warwick Sewer Authority in an amount not to exceed $11 million from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. At this time, I'll turn over to Jeff to walk us through.
Sure. Thank you. So this is an application for a loan from the Warwick Sewer Authority for up to $11 million with a term of up to 30 years. As you said, from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This is a project on the Department of Environmental Management's project priority list. It has received a certificate of approval from DEM. It meets the criteria for eligibility for a loan from the State Revolving Fund. It's to fund sewer construction project in the Bayside area, as well as Airport Road and Amtrak Interceptor Project in Warwick. Our understanding is that the city has also allocated $7 million, an additional $7 million of their ARPA funds to this project to reduce the cost. This would be a revenue pledge. Coverage of the existing revenue bonds that we have is extremely high, and our financial advisor will talk about, even including all of the enterprise debt, is still well in excess of coverage that typically is our requirement. DEM has indicated that this has got a useful life in greater than 30 years, has the term of the loan, and certification of that will be delivered as a contingent part of the closing. In terms of climate resiliency of the city overall, the authority, the city did participate in our municipal resilience program back in November 2020. They have received some grant funding for some of those projects. They do have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan, and the authority has submitted to DEM earlier this year a climate resiliency plan and created a capital improvement plan on the back of that. We do think that this is a project, as I said, that is on the priority list. It does have certificate of approval, does meet the requirements of the State Revolving Fund, and we would recommend approving of this. But from a credit point of view, I'll turn it over to Steve Mascara from PFM to go through the credit report.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we're seeking approval, as Jeff mentioned, for the Warwick Sewer Authority for up to $11 million, for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Proceeds will finance the Bayside Project, Airport Interceptor, Amtrak Interceptor, funded debt service reserve, and pay cost of issuance. It's a revenue pledge, non-rated, fixed rate up to 30 years. Credit strengths include the legal structure provided by the trust indenture, the fully funded debt service reserve, history of stable operating performance, healthy debt service coverage, above average service area, improving debt position, and trend of stable rates. Mitigating factors, the authority does have a fairly large capital plan over the next 10 years. And then also, while not directly impacting the sewer system, the city does have a large unfunded and OPEB obligation. Bottom of page 1, you can see the outstanding RIB loans, $42 million approximately. Turning to page 2, just under the introduction, as Jeff noted, at the bottom paragraph under the introduction, the city will be dedicating $7 million of their ARP funds towards the project, the Bayside project, which should reduce the assessments down from 25,000+ to approximately 17,000. Turning to page 3, 5-year summary of outstanding debt. Both GO and revenue bonds have supported the sewer system over the past several years. Debt has been declining. Outstanding debt as of 16, $106 million. That's down to $65 million as of June 30th, 20. Security for the borrowing will be a revenue pledge. Source of revenue would be use fees and assessments. Turning to page 4, the rate structure. The authority just did a rate study in July of 2021. The study indicated that there would be no need for increase in use rates over the next 5 years. So we have sort of the history here of where their rates are. Just to give you an idea, I always mention this when we talk about rates. NBC puts out a rate study every year on systems in the state. Warwick's in the middle of the pack. On a residential basis, it's approximately $500 per year, which is manageable given the service area demographics. Which at the bottom of page 4, you can see that the median family income and per capita income are both above state average. Turning to page 5, tax base, healthy tax base, 10.6 billion. And then in the middle of the page, this is what we look at, and Jeff alluded to it, about the debt service coverage. So all debt, including the GO and revenue bonds, debt service coverage as of June 20 of 2020 was 1.4 times. On the revenue pledge itself, it's 3.27 times. The indenture requirement is 1.25 times, so the coverage is well above the indenture requirement. Before I get to the credit summary, I did include 5 years of the balance sheet, Appendix A, 5 years of the income statement, and then in Appendix B, just as noted, as far as challenges on the city side, we do note the pension unfunded on page 9. You'll see that the Police 1 and Fire 1 pension systems, 231 million unfunded, 23% funded ratio, which is low. And on the OPEB on the following page 10, OPEB's at 383 million, zero funding, which is not uncommon on OPEB to not have a trust set up. They do pay-go for their system. So turning back to the credit summary on page 5, the city's sewer fund has a history of stable operating performance. The city ended the past 5 fiscal years with increases in its net position. The city's sewer debt position has declined over the past several years. They've met their debt service coverage test. Their demographics are above state and national averages. Offsetting these positive credit factors are the sizable CIP over the next 10 years, as well as the pension and OPEB that I just noted. PFM recommends approval of the loan application subject to completion of all legal requirements by the city and the authority, and with the understanding that the bank will review the request in connection with the project priority list and bank capacity. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, so, yeah, no, I was just going to mention that we have the executive director of the sewer authority, if you'd like to hear from her and any questions you might have. About
Sure,
that.
yeah, we have Betty Ann Rogers from Warwick. And if you'd like to make any statements and comments, so we can talk about the project.
At this time, I don't have any statements, except thank you very much for inviting us here today. And we hope the application gets approved. We're looking forward to moving forward with this project.
Great, thank you. At this time, if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard and have anything to say, we can provide you some time. Please identify yourself.
Hi, so I'm Alexei Weaver, and so I'm...
Sorry.
Do you mind just?
Oh, sure.
Sure.
So I am a resident of Bayside, and I actually wrote a letter to the Infrastructure Bank with my comment as well, so you should have received that in addition to what I'm about to say. You mentioned just now that $7 million of the American Rescue Funds would be used towards Bayside, and that's actually not possible. Federal funds can't be used for this project because of the Native American remains within the project. So that's been said a lot, that's not true. I actually am going to just read to you really quickly. So as part of writing my comment, I made sure to go through the criteria that DEM uses for the Clean Water Act. And I just want to point out that, so this project is not supported by residents. Over 400 residents signed on to a letter stating that they did not want this project. It's been almost 50 years since we were supposed to be sewered as a result of the Clean Water Act. And so many people now have septic systems that are within DEM and EPA standards and are actively doing their part to take care of the bay, that there are only 36 cesspools remaining. So this is a very expensive and very large project that's being put on the back of the constituents as opposed to actually looking at alternatives. The cost-benefit analysis, someone said that the area of Warwick is above average income. Bayside is a $58,000 medium income. So if that's the case, we are not above. And many of my neighbors are retired. Many of them have fixed income, and the tax assessment alone makes it cost prohibitive to ever hook up to the sewer system. We know the Warwick Sewer Authority has low hookup rates. We know that causes the pipes to do poorly, and I'm telling you that this will not have hookups in Bayside. So you are building infrastructure that will not be hooked up to and is going to fail. Secondly, the grinder pumps are also a huge issue because the citizens are going to have to maintain and repair grinder pumps. This is another cost. I can tell you now that I will never hook up to this system because the cost to replace my septic every 20 years is cheaper than to be hooked up to the WSA where I live. So I have more to say about the environment as well. I mean, I think this is terrible for the environment. It's not green. It's on the list. It's shown as not green. I think that this is about development and getting rid of the open spaces in my neighborhood because the sewers will open them up to development. But this is just wrong, and I do not think this project should be put on the backs of the Bayside residents because it's going to ruin people's lives. And it's also going to ultimately result in probably a disaster when the pipes that should not... I live at the bottom of the hill, so I live on Van Zandt. All of the streets coming off of Tidewater are going downhill towards the water. They're using grinder pumps to run everything uphill towards the water. So if you only have one person hooking up on a road and they're at the bottom of the hill, their grinder pump has to pump all the way up that hill. So when something fails with gravity, it's going into the water. And we have seals, we have deer, we have foxes, we have all sorts of animals that I love seeing, and I don't want the open space taken away because it will become buildable with sewers, because there's already very little area left for these animals. And I don't want the water ruined. I totally agree we need to fix the cesspools. The EPA has a compendium that just came out in August that talks about using grant funding to convert cesspools to septic. I'm asking you to please reconsider funding this project. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Pauline Janest, and I also am a resident of Bayside. And quite frankly, the numbers that you used regarding the income and the median household of that area weren't specific to Bayside. I think that you're using citywide numbers.
They are citywide numbers.
They are citywide numbers.
Because it's
And-
not just Bayside, there's other projects part of this approval.
Exactly. So part of the approval is the Apponaug Connector and the Buttonwoods Interceptor, I'm pretty sure, correct? And what we're asking is that you take the money for the Bayside 86 project out because the median income of the area is $58,000. The median household is $278,000. That's what the houses are worth. So when you look at the EPA compendiums, they say before you go into any infrastructure programs, look at the actual area. Don't look at the city and don't look at the state numbers. There are only 935 households that are being affected here, and those 935 households cannot afford this plan. The area, I actually worked with Ed Lattiser and Frank Ferry 10 years ago to try to push this project in this area. I really did. And the more that I learned about it, the more I realized this is not the correct project for this area. This area has topography issues. It's historically Rocky Point. You're going to hit ledge. If you read the contract, D'Ambra has all kinds of addendums within the contract that say, barring finding ledge, you're going to find it. It's going to increase the cost. The $7 million that the mayor has said that he's using with the American Recovery Act money, if you look at the budget of the Sewer Authority, every single cent of it is going toward repair and replace. None of it is going toward new projects. They have $700,000 approximately in the bank according to their budget. They are not flush, apparently, like Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank is. So the cost and the benefits don't match. In 2016, the law was amended, 7349, and it clearly states that the sewer authorities, they have to come up with plans that are cost-effective and environmentally sound. And this project just does not meet both of those criteria. It is not cost-effective. It is out of control. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have supply chain issues. There is no way that this project is coming in at the $17 million price that D'Ambra has very graciously offered us since 2016. We all know how costs increase. The former engineer, or I'm not sure if he's the engineer, Earl Bond, he was the former director. One of the things that he has quoted as saying is that every single year, a project increases by 5%. They're using 2016 numbers when they say that they're making this contract with D'Ambra. It is now 2021. There is no 5% increase just to cover the normal cost increases. And now we're in a pandemic. We are asking you to please say no to Bayside 86. We do need sewer pipes in Warwick fixed. We do need existing infrastructure to be fixed. There are other ways to get people to join the sewers in other areas where there has been a very low rate of people connecting. They can come up with all kinds of programs and they just refuse to look at that. And I'm not blaming the 3 people who are sitting here today. These sewer authority people are very nice individuals. Their job is sewers. Our city council and our mayor they're ignoring the needs of the area and just pushing an infrastructure rather than pushing what's best for the bay and for the people who live there. So we ask that you vote with that information in mind.
Anyone on the board, any questions?
See if there's anybody else, sorry.
Is there anyone else who wanted to? Anyone from the city to say anything at this point? I'm going to ask our legal counsel, Chris Vitale, to kind of help me with this one. But generally speaking, at the bank, we're not in a place, in a position to evaluate validity of projects within the city. That falls within the city and the DEM to approve and bring to us. Our role is, and I do not wish to minimize or kind of sideswipe any arguments you've made, and I have a background as an engineer and I listen to everyone, but this is not our role at the bank, to evaluate what happens within the city. If I'm mistaken, you can add to that, Chris, because I want to make sure to be very factual about what I'm saying
Sure.
here. So,
Yeah, no, the principal decision whether to go forward with the project is certainly by the community. So if the community, as they have here, have voted, both the executive, the mayor, and the city council, along with the sewer authority, have voted to authorize the project, to move forward with the project, our principal role is to look at the credit and the borrower's ability to repay the loan, and do they have sufficient revenue. This is a revenue pledge, so PFM has analyzed that and presented that to the board. And there are, the city of Warwick has been borrowing money for many, many years under this trust indenture, and there are certain metrics that have to be met, and PFM has laid those out with a credit review that those metrics have been met and will have to be certified to for closing. So, but I would also add, outside of that the bank has, spoken to in recent days and gotten feedback from other third parties, including our regulatory partner in this program is DEM, about this project as well. Have not, gotten any, and Jeff or other, please correct me, but have not gotten any communication from them that we should not move forward with this, the project and financing the project. And obviously the city analyzes what's the best way to finance it once they make a decision to do the project. And the SRF is, 99 times out of 100 going to be a community's most cost-effective way of financing a project like this.
yeah, and I'll add to that, but I saw the 2 individuals who spoke had their hands up. So-
I just have one question, because you're a representative of PFM, correct?
Correct.
One of the things that he just clarified was that they did not look specifically at the area of Bayside, that they were using citywide numbers. And the EPA does say when you're going to expand infrastructure, to look at the area itself that's being affected. This is 935 households, it's not the whole city. When you have an area of 935 households that have $58,000 income and 278,000 houses, like value of houses, $278,000, that changes what they should be putting forward as what's cost effective, because it isn't cost effective for the area.
Yeah, I didn't opine on what's cost effective or not.
Oh, I'm not saying that you did, I'm just
No.
saying that number, that specific number that you used.
But understanding the revenue pledge covers the whole city, all the bond issues they've issued historically will cover all future bond issues. So we look at the city as a whole, when we look at income numbers, when we look at total revenue for assessments, use fees, we look at the whole system, because everything is pledged under the indenture to the bank.
And you also said that there's a $7 million pledge from the city using
It's-
ARPA
it
loans,
was
but
Our
budget
understanding
is
and
different.
communicated from the authority that 7 million of the ARPA funds would be used for the project. So that's what was communicated, so that was our understanding.
But did you get the budget where the $7 million is clearly
I'll
allocated on a
defer
line?
to the authority.
It's the mayor's pledge from the ARPA funds to the sewer authority. It's in our budget as a line item, $7 million. It won't be used for anything but Bayside. Those are the mayor's words, and I'm repeating exactly what he said.
And those are the mayor's words
Yes.
versus what's in black and white in the contract.
It's a budget line item in our annual budget for 2022, $7 million for Bayside.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the mayor's budget doesn't say that either, neither does the WSA budget that I've seen. But I actually wanted to speak to the point about that you said the city council and mayor voted or something along those lines. There has been no city council vote on this. So
2020, February 2020 there was.
there was?
Yes, February 2020.
Okay, so, but what I'm saying, so I want to talk about though the residents, because like that's why we're here. So we were informed, so I bought my house in March of 2018, and the first I heard about this was when I received notice in the end of August that I was going to have to pay a $16,900 tax assessment for sewers when I have a new septic. So this decision excluding the residents of Bayside should also mean that they don't get points from community support because the community doesn't support this. So this, like per DEM criteria, I think what I'm trying to say is we have been going through all the proper channels and talking to all the right people, and like I've been at DEM, I've been at CRMC, I have been everywhere trying to help other people see what we're talking about. Like I do not think that this project meets the criteria as it's laid out. I do not know how it was presented to DEM because I wasn't there, but I don't see how we could be looking at the same thing and you could be seeing that it's meeting the criteria, because if you scored it the way that it should be scored, it's not high on that priority list. Like I'm telling you, it's not, it should not be on that priority list as high as it is. So maybe during your review before you close the loan, you should take a closer look. But there are some pretty glaring discrepancies, and specifically in the budget too.
So Jeff, do you mind just walking maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes? Tell us more,
Yeah.
Chris, how the process, when the city comes to us for a project, how the process works.
Absolutely. So
Because what our purview is, and I think it's important for you to understand that I'm not being dismissive, but it's just, we have a certain role that we play, right?
Right.
And how did the whole thing evolve? So I think it's important for folks to understand.
Sure, happy to. So when a community is interested in financing a project through the Infrastructure Bank, specifically through the Revolving Fund, Clean Water Revolving Fund, the first step is they have to get, as you just alluded to, they have to get that project on DEM annually publishes a project priority list. The bank has no role in reviewing, vetting, scoring, determining the propriety. DEM, that is DEM's statutory role, is to review those applications, which they get from numerous, almost every community around the state. There's over $1 billion worth of projects on that list every year. So they take in all those applications, they review them, they score them according to regulatory criteria that are published, and that document gets published once a year. Only at that point can a community come to the bank to seek financing for the project. And even then, before the bank can close and fund a loan, they have to get another approval from DEM, which again, this is in state law, is called the Certificate of Approval, which is a more comprehensive review that DEM does at that point. It's a sort of preliminary scoring system they use to develop the list every year. But once a project is going to move forward to be funded and closed, DEM has to issue a certificate of approval. So as Jeff alluded to, it's already been issued for this project. So DEM, under the process, has concluded what the bank needs to move forward. So all of that work is done without the bank's involvement. The bank is a financing entity that looks, as Steve has advised, looks at the credit and the ability to repay, and does not have any role whatsoever in reviewing the application of the regulations and where it scores and where it doesn't. If it's on the list and it's issued a certificate of approval and the bank has the funds to make the loan, unless there's a significant credit issue, the bank historically makes the loans.
Can I just say one more thing before you go?
Of course.
And the other, I'm sorry. We are talking about the mayor's budget. We're talking about the mayor allocating $7 million. The the mayor did not allocate $7 million because the mayor's budget also uses the term exactly like this. And we may be able to use some of the American Rescue Plan money for Bayside. It is written, it's in black and white, it is certified, it is signed by the mayor. That to me is not a $7 million allocation of funds. He might say things out loud in meetings, but what's in black and white does not match. And that information that's been given to you should reflect the fact that he said we may get $3 million to offset this cost. And that's it.
Of course. So I would add, at closing, should the board decide to move forward with the loan, the city, through advisors, will have to certify the numbers essentially, right? And those numbers will either firmly take into account the $7 million, and if it is not there, then that changes those coverages potentially. I'm just saying potentially, but I'm just saying as a condition of actually closing the loan, the city is required to deliver certifications of third parties that the numbers are there to meet those metrics in the required for them to borrow the money.
So I would only suggest if we push this forward, to add it as a fifth condition, along in addition to the federal, state, and other laws, that it would be subject to verification of the $7 million allocation of the ARPA funds.
Yeah, it's the board's discretion.
That way it doesn't move forward in place.
That's how it's been presented, so.
That has been how it's been presented, correct?
Yeah, it's in your numbers, correct? It's in your coverages. And,
It's in the memo, but it's not a contingency to close the loan.
right.
So if you
We're
want to
using that as a number.
Right, because
but-
really it only at the end of, obviously at the end of the day, but in the totality of it, it's bringing down the top line. So it really is not in, it's not in your coverages, so correct me if I'm wrong here at all,
Right,
Steve. but-
you know, what we looked, as you know, what we
Bringing down
looked at
the
is the historical. Historically, they've done fine. Their coverage is significant. They've had their 5-year rate study on in a timely basis. They've done everything they're supposed to under their intention. They're well above the 125 coverage. They're only borrowing 11 million. So if the project's 18 million, you're only lending them 11 of the 18. So if the 7 doesn't come through, then they can't finance the total project. But my recommendation assumes they'll get the 7 million, but it's not contingent upon it. It's contingent upon bank capacity and other things that I
You are
recommend.
giving us insight whether their credit worthiness is good for the $11 million.
Correct, exactly.
That's what we are judging.
How does the draw schedule work on a project like this, considering the $7 million, right? Because typically in a construction, there's a draw of equity and a draw of debt at the same
Yeah.
time. So how does that work process-wise?
Really depends, like that equity could be contributed capital from the city, right? It could be a grant that they got from a third, a different federal agency, so.
So they're required to use that first and then debt second,
No,
or a mix
that
of the
is a
two in
requirement.
any particular way?
No.
I don't think there's any precedence for that.
Right.
It's not within our mandate.
Yeah, right.
So, go ahead.
You're saying $11 million and you're saying $17 million, but the $11 million is also to include the money for Buttonwoods Interceptor as well, correct? That's above Bayside. Bayside's the third thing. If you look at how it is, the 37 points goes to Bayside, but there's higher allocated points for 2 other projects that the WSA is looking for money for. So if you're right now voting on $11 million total, are you saying $11 million total for just Bayside, or are you talking about $11 million total for all 3 projects that are at the top? And if that's the case, and that does change the numbers that you're speaking about, because it's not a $7 million but $11 million difference, it's, you have to subtract those other 2 projects when you're trying to figure out your numbers for Bayside.
So it's $11 million for any of the projects that the city has applied for, which are on the list, and for which they have certificates of approval.
And do they have to spend the money and prioritize the way that DEM has prioritized them? Do they have to do the projects first that are higher up on the list, or do they just get to go right at Bayside?
No, my understanding is they would be able to spend the money for any of those eligible projects. So if one project was moving faster than another, things of that nature, that they'd be able to draw the money
So
down.
in the past, we've received like a 2017 bond, the 2017 A bond. And the bond itself had listed a few projects, Bayside being one of them. Now, would this $11 million come out saying Buttonwoods Interceptor, other thing that's above it, and then Bayside, is that how it would be allocated, or would it say
It would
strictly?
look, I'm sorry, it would look very similar to what you saw in that prior bond with a list of eligible projects. But again, any project has to have been on the project list and got the certificate
And the
of.
city's not obligated to do it in the order of priority, being top down?
My understanding, subject to DEM, I've never heard of DEM requiring that kind of allocation based on,
I'm asking the law.
or drawdown based upon ranking on the list.
But you are in charge of the drawdown, correct? I know you're the DEM
We are the
infrastructure bank,
drawdown,
I'm just
yes.
curious to know.
The project priority list is a way of ranking projects across the state with regards to certain scoring. And if there is an issue, if every project came in for a loan, then we would, subject to credit approval, we would approve the number 1, 2, 3, 4 until we ran out of money.
Mhm.
That typically doesn't happen. So it just has to be on the project priority list. Now, if there are too many requests for loans, then we have capital to meet because we have limited amount of capital.
Mhm.
We try to do as much as we can. But again, that is how the priority list would then determine whether or not a project got funded by a loan. Assuming that all projects on the list were creditworthy, and if they all came in at once, we would not have enough capital to meet $1 billion worth of.
I understand
So
that. Okay.
that's where it comes in. So the fact that one project's number 8 and one is number 11, well, if 1 through 9 or 10 don't come in, then we've got enough capital to allocate, subject to credit approval of the board, to that loan request. So our loan request is really to fund a project that has come in from the city, or in this case, the sewer authority. And then they decide how, if it costs more than what we've lent them, then they have to figure out how to come up with the rest of the money.
Okay, thank you.
When we had another one of our board members, Treasurer Magaziner, join us, I don't know, Chris, do you want to do a 1-minute Cliff Notes version of where we're at, or?
So apologies for my tardiness, I had another commitment that ran late, but I think because I missed the bulk of the conversation, I'll just abstain from this one and then join in the next items.
Okay, good. So at this point, we have listened and, we've explained to you the position of the bank and what our mandate is and what our role is, and then in the part of the project, and I really do not believe there's much we can do other than take action on the request for an $11 million loan that City Warwick has asked for. Are we, any other comments from the board members that we want to add something or not add something? I don't know.
There's no dispute that this is on the project priority list from DEM and approved in accordance with their process.
We cannot close without those things, so those all get certified too, they have closing
By DEM.
but we've seen all that at this point, but they get certified too.
We can add a sentence to re-verify all the requirements that were stated, and that's all we can do to make sure everything is in place.
Right.
At this point, we're just voting for the bank to proceed, the staff to proceed towards the closing. This is not a closing, correct?
No, that's correct.
And
I would just note at the end of the memo from Jeff, the standard conditions, so at the bottom of page 2 of the credit memo, those are standard conditions, right? The project has to be on the list.
Yep.
That could also say have the certificate from DEM. That is an absolute requirement by law. Borough has to agree with every state, federal, local, rule regulation related to the project and acceptable financing documents, essentially.
that in mind, do I have a motion to approve the loan request from the Warwick Sewer Authority in amount not to exceed $11 million from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and consideration of Chris's summary?
So moved.
I would just say that I'd like to see a condition that the line item from the mayor is satisfied.
The $7 million.
Right, yeah, the $7 million, make sure that that was done in accordance with whatever process that needs to be done with.
That's the consensus of the board to do that,
Yeah,
yeah?
I agree with that.
Second.
Okay.
Right, so that would be evidence that the city has designated, appropriated that $7 million.
In accordance with
That's
whatever
what that
rules
would
that
be.
they have
Yeah,
governed
it's
by
all
for purposes of those dollars.
That's what that would be as a condition. Okay.
So how do we write, do we want to redo the
So,
motion now in a way?
Do
or-
the motion subject to Josh's
Subject to Josh's,
amendment, which we'll note in the minutes, of course, for the approval.
A motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Okay. The motion is approved unanimously.